True Understanding. Andy Burroughs, True Understanding. Vimy Ridge, France. He'd walked this route before, his small private pilgrimage, often on his way south, to pay respects to people he'd never known. The path climbed in a steady, unglamorous line. No dramatic vistas, just the insistence of ground and weather. A drizzle hung in the air, too fine to be called rain, but enough to bead on the leaves and darken the stone. At the crest, the visitor center waited. A low, clean building set back from the ridge, timber and glass, discreet as if ashamed to exist here. The car park was close to empty. The grass was clipped. The gravel was pale and orderly. He signed in at the terminal with 2 taps and a thumbprint. The screen asked for no reason. It never did. People came here for many reasons, or none. That was the point. A woman at the desk looked up and offered a practiced neutrality that passed for kindness. "First time to Vimy Ridge?" she asked. He shook his head. She nodded once, then slid a small card across the counter. Thin polymer, a simple printed circle in the middle like an eye. "This is a new edition. Wear it on your chest," she said. "It will pace you." He clipped it to his jacket. The circle warmed against the fabric, a quiet pulse. The first room was not an exhibition. It was an orientation. A single panel stood under soft light, its text laid out with the calm authority of institutions that did not need your agreement. Welcome to the Ridge Experience. What follows is an effective synthesis. Personal diaries written contemporaneously have been analyzed for linguistic markers associated with stress, anticipation, dissociation, fatigue, and temporal distortion. These markers have been modeled to produce a bounded emotional field representative of lived experience. Environmental data has been derived from long-term biological and chemical analysis of the ridge itself. Soil compaction, growth interruption, mycelial rupture, and trace residues consistent with repeated mechanical shock. These signals combine into fields. You may move through the exhibit at your own pace. The system aligns and attenuates the fields for your safety. No interpretation is provided. No heroism is suggested. No blame is assigned. No comfort is offered. He stood for longer than he needed to, reading it twice, then a third time. Not because he didn't understand, but because the language had a kind of honesty he'd stopped expecting from public words. Beyond the panel, the main hall opened. It was empty of artifacts. No uniforms, no rifles, no flags, no curated relics to let the visitor feel close to the past while remaining safely separate. Just space, and the ridge itself visible through a glass door at the far end. A long, exposed line of ground with its thin skin of grass, its shallow heather, its stunted trees. On a side wall there was a list of names. Not a memorial in the old way. No carved stone, no wreaths, no annual ceremony. Just a scroll of text that moved slowly, line by line, like code. Names, dates, and absence. He scanned until he found what he'd come for. He had no photograph, no family story. Only a folder of records he'd once downloaded late at night, drunk on the mistake of curiosity. A boy, 19, from a village he'd never visited. A conscripted labor unit, a ridge, a week of shelling, fighting in something history still could not explain without lying. He activated the device. Nothing happened at first. Then the air seemed to change. Not temperature, not pressure. Something subtler. The sense that the room had become narrower without moving. That the walls had leaned in a fraction. His jaw tightened. His shoulders rose without permission. The pulse in the card on his chest slowed, then matched his breath as if gently insisting on pace. Time did not pass correctly. The light in the hall seemed to stutter, as if the day outside were being played through old film. His thoughts came in pieces. Whole sentences collapsed into instincts. He understood, with a clarity that made him ashamed, why people wrote diaries full of small details when the world was breaking. The mind wanted proof that the ordinary had existed. A sound arrived, distant at first, then immediate. Not a bang, not a roar. A concussive thump that lived in the ribs more than the ears. The ridge outside the glass looked unchanged, yet the ground beneath his feet felt as if it remembered being struck. He tried to walk and found that each step cost more than it should. Not physically heavier, but morally. Like moving forward meant exposing yourself. The air smelled of wet soil and something metallic. He blinked, and for a moment the hall was not a hall. It was open ground. It was low visibility and sudden noise. It was bodies moving without coherence, each person trapped in their own fear, their own instruction, their own hope of being spared by randomness. Compression, remembered without memory. He felt a strange gratitude, banal and ugly, that he was here voluntarily, that he could leave, that someone had built a system to align and attenuate the fields for his safety. The thought came with its own shame, quick as nausea. The card on his chest warmed as if in reply. He stopped near the glass and looked out at the ridge. It was weed-free, managed, maintained. And yet, under the thin grass, something had not healed. The exhibit did not show blood or bone, but it showed the other thing. What repeated shock did to a place, and what a place did back to those who stood on it. A child laughed somewhere behind him in the building. A distant, ordinary sound. It felt obscene for half a second, then correct. Life continuing. That, too, was part of the field. He stayed until the pulse on his chest tightened, the system's gentle signal that his time here was nearing its limit. He could have ignored it. Some did. But he had learned, in his own life, that limits were either chosen or imposed. He stepped back, and the room loosened. The walls returned to their proper distance. His jaw unclenched. His breath found its normal rhythm. The light smoothed into continuity. Everything was correct again. He walked back through the orientation room, past the panel's calm sentences, and dropped the device in the returns pouch. Then he was out into the normalcy of the car park. The drizzle had stopped. The ridge held its line against the pale sky. He stood for a moment beside his car, hand on the door handle, and felt the last echoes of the field fading like a note leaving the body. Then he drove south, carrying the clear knowledge that some assumptions about others' suffering, once shattered, should stay broken.